The wrench slipped from Maya's oil-stained fingers as the garage owner's words cut through the humid air. "We don't hire girls here, especially not ones without proper training." The rejection echoed off the concrete walls while seasoned mechanics looked up from their work, some smirking, others avoiding her eyes. Maya's toolbox sat heavy in her grip, filled with instruments she'd mastered through countless nights under flickering streetlights, fixing neighbors' cars for free. The door slammed behind her with finality. 2 years later, Maya stood before the same garage, but this time cameras surrounded her. The International Championship trophy gleamed in her arms, its weight nothing compared to the tools she'd carried that day. The same owner who had dismissed her now stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment and recognition. Maya looked at him, then at the crowd of reporters waiting for her words. "What country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and if stories like this inspire you, feel free to subscribe for more." The fluorescent lights of Maya's cramped apartment cast harsh shadows across scattered car manuals and printed engine diagrams. At 19, she lived alone in a studio that doubled as her makeshift workshop, where she'd spend hours bent over salvaged car parts, her back aching from hunching over transmissions she'd pulled from junkyards across the city. Her fingers, permanently stained with motor oil despite countless scrubbings, traced the intricate illustrations in her mechanical engineering textbooks, books she'd bought secondhand and highlighted until the pages were more yellow than white. The apartment smelled of WD-40 and instant coffee, a combination that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Maya had taught herself everything. No formal training, no mentors, just an insatiable hunger to understand how things worked and an old Corolla she'd bought with 3 months of saved waitressing tips. That car had become her teacher, breaking down in new and creative ways that forced her to diagnose, research, and repair, with nothing but YouTube videos and library books as her guides. The neighbors had grown accustomed to the sound of her socket wrench at all hours, the occasional frustrated grunt when a bolt wouldn't budge, and the triumphant hum of an engine turning over after hours of troubleshooting. Mrs. Chen from 2B had been her first real customer, knocking tentatively on Maya's door with a Honda that wouldn't start. When Maya fixed it for the cost of parts, word spread through the building like wildfire. But Maya wanted more than apartment complex repairs. She wanted to work in a real garage, to learn from experienced mechanics, to feel the satisfaction of solving complex problems with proper equipment instead of jury-rigged solutions. She'd walk past Martinez Auto Repair every morning on her way to her waitressing job, watching the mechanics work with tools she could only dream of owning. The garage occupied a corner lot that had seen better days, its brick facade weathered but sturdy. Through the bay doors, she could see hydraulic lifts, professional diagnostic equipment, and mechanics who moved with the confidence that came from years of experience. The smell of coffee and motor oil drifted onto the sidewalk, and Maya would slow her pace, imagining herself among them. She'd rehearsed her pitch 100 times. 3 years of self-taught experience, a growing list of satisfied customers, and a passion that burned brighter than the acetylene torches she watched them use. She'd even prepared a portfolio, photos of her work, testimonials from neighbors, before and after shots of engines she'd rebuilt from scrap. The morning she finally worked up the courage to walk through those bay doors, Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd washed her hands until they were raw, put on her cleanest jeans, and carried her toolbox with the same reverence others might reserve for a briefcase to a job interview. Carlos Martinez, the owner, was a thick-set man in his 50s with forearms like tree trunks and a permanent squint from years of staring into engine bays. He looked up from an invoice as Maya approached, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to barely concealed irritation. "We're not hiring," he said before she could speak. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk about—" "Kid, we're not hiring. Especially not—" He gestured vaguely at her, his meaning clear without saying the words. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she pressed on. "I've been working on cars for 3 years. I can show you my work, I have references." 3 years? Carlos scoffed. "You look like you're barely out of high school. Real mechanics spend years learning their trade properly, not playing around in their driveways." The other mechanics had stopped what they were doing, drawn by the conversation. Maya felt their eyes on her, some curious, others already dismissive. One older man with silver hair and oil-stained coveralls shook his head slowly, as if watching a child trying to convince adults she could fly. "I rebuilt a transmission last month," Maya said, her voice stronger now. a 2005 Civic. The synchronizer rings were shot and, YouTube University, right? Another mechanic called out, and several others chuckled. Let me guess, you watched a few videos and think you're ready for the big leagues. Maya's face burned, but she reached for her phone, pulling up photos of her work. Look, I can show you. We don't hire girls here, Carlos said flatly, the words dropping like stones into the sudden silence of the garage. This is heavy work, real work, not something you dabble in because it's trendy. The dismissal hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd expected skepticism about her lack of formal training, maybe doubt about her experience level. She hadn't expected to be dismissed simply for being female, as if her gender somehow negated the countless hours she'd spent elbow-deep in engine grease. But my work speaks for itself, she managed, hating how small her voice sounded. I've never had a comeback, never had a customer unsatisfied. Kid, you're wasting my time and yours? This isn't a hobby shop. We work on real cars for real customers who expect real mechanics. Carlos turned back to his paperwork with the finality of someone ending a conversation. Try the oil change place down the street. They hire anyone. Maya stood there for a moment longer, toolbox heavy in her grip, watching the mechanics return to their work as if she'd never existed. The dismissal was complete, casual, crushing in its certainty. She turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing off the concrete floor, the sound swallowed by the noise of pneumatic tools and running engines. Outside, the morning sun felt too bright, the sounds of traffic too loud. Maya sat in her old Corolla for a long time, staring at the steering wheel she'd replaced herself when the original cracked, at the dashboard she'd rewired when the lights stopped working, at the gear shift she'd adjusted when second gear started grinding. This car was proof of her capabilities, but apparently, that proof wasn't enough for the world she wanted to enter. That night, Maya sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by rejection letters from every garage in a 20-mile radius. Some were polite, citing lack of openings. Others were more direct about their preference for experienced mechanics. Code, she'd learned, for men who'd gone through formal training programs. The sting of Carlos's words still burned in her chest, mixing with the anger that surprised her with its intensity. She'd never thought of herself as someone who gave up easily, but the weight of constant rejection was wearing her down like water on stone. She picked up a wrench from her toolkit, feeling its familiar weight in her palm. This wrench had helped her replace dozens of brake pads, remove countless stubborn bolts, and solve problems that had stumped other people. But apparently, none of that mattered if you were a woman in a world that had decided women didn't belong under the hood of a car. Maya was about to close her laptop when a forum post caught her eye. Someone had shared a video from the International Young Mechanics Championship, an annual competition that brought together automotive technicians under 25 from around the world. She watched, transfixed, as young mechanics from different countries tackled complex diagnostic challenges, their hands moving with the same confidence she felt when she worked on her own projects. The competition wasn't about formal credentials or gender. It was about skill, speed, and problem-solving under pressure. Things Maya had been developing in her apartment workshop for years. She scrolled through the application requirements. No formal training necessary. No gender restrictions. Just a portfolio of work, a practical skills assessment, and the passion to compete at the highest level. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt something other than frustration. She felt possibility. The application deadline was in 3 months. 3 months to document her work, to prepare for the skills assessment, to transform years of apartment-based learning into something that could compete on an international stage. It seemed impossible, but then again, so had rebuilding her first transmission. Maya pulled out a notebook and began making lists. Every repair she'd done, every problem she'd solved, every late night she'd spent figuring out why an engine wouldn't turn over, or why a transmission slipped between gears. Her informal education had been chaotic, driven by necessity and curiosity rather than curriculum, but it had been thorough in ways that formal training might not have been. She'd learned to improvise, to think creatively when she didn't have the right tool or the budget for new parts. She'd developed diagnostic skills through trial and error, building an intuitive understanding of how cars communicated their problems through sound, vibration, and behavior. These weren't skills that showed up on a certificate, but they were real, hard-won, and uniquely hers. The next morning, Maya began documenting everything. She photographed every repair she'd done in the past year, writing detailed explanations of the problems she'd encountered and how she'd solved them. She reached out to neighbors and friends who'd brought her their cars, asking for written testimonials about her work. Mrs. Chen was the first to respond, writing 3 pages about how Maya had not only fixed her Honda, but had explained every step of the repair process, teaching her how to recognize early warning signs of future problems. Maya doesn't just fix cars, she wrote. She empowers people to understand their vehicles. Others followed. The college student whose transmission Maya had rebuilt for half the cost of a shop, quote. The single mother whose brakes Maya had replaced on a payment plan when money was tight. The elderly man whose classic Mustang Maya had brought back to life after it had sat unused for 5 years. Reading their words, Maya began to see her work differently. She wasn't just a mechanic trying to break into an established industry. She was someone who had built a practice based on accessibility, education, and genuine care for her customers. That had value, regardless of what Carlos Martinez or any other garage owner thought. The skills assessment was scheduled for a Saturday morning at a community college 2 hours away. Maya arrived early, her toolbox in hand and her stomach churning with nervous energy. The parking lot was filled with pickup trucks and cars bearing the logos of established garages, their drivers walking with the confident swagger of people who belonged in mechanical spaces. Maya felt conspicuously out of place in her carefully chosen outfit, clean jeans and a button-down shirt that she hoped struck the right balance between professional and practical. Her toolbox, worn but well-maintained, seemed modest compared to the rolling cabinets and professional equipment bags she saw others carrying. The assessment took place in a garage bay filled with vehicles in various states of disrepair. Each candidate was assigned a different diagnostic challenge, given a time limit, and expected to identify the problem, explain their reasoning, and demonstrate the repair process. Maya's test vehicle was a 1998 Honda Civic with an intermittent starting problem. The symptoms were maddeningly inconsistent. Sometimes it started immediately, other times it cranked without turning over, and occasionally it would start and then die within seconds. She'd seen this exact problem before, in Mrs. Rodriguez's car from 4C. The temptation was to jump to the solution she'd found then, but Maya forced herself to approach it systematically. She checked the battery, tested the starter, examined the fuel system, and listened carefully to the engine's behavior during failed start attempts. The intermittent nature of the problem suggested an electrical issue, but not a simple one. Maya traced wiring harnesses with her fingers, looking for signs of wear or damage. When she found a section where the insulation had worn thin and was occasionally grounding against the engine block, she felt the familiar rush of satisfaction that came with solving a puzzle. Intermittent ground fault in the main harness, she announced to the evaluator, a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and an expression of professional skepticism. The wire insulation is compromised right here, and engine vibration is causing it to make intermittent contact with the block. Maya demonstrated the repair, carefully cleaning the damaged section, splicing in new wire, and properly insulating the connection. When she turned the key, the engine started immediately and ran smoothly. "How long have you been working on cars?" the evaluator asked, making notes on her clipboard. 3 years, but entirely self-taught, Maya replied, waiting for the familiar dismissal. Instead, the woman nodded thoughtfully. "Your diagnostic approach is very systematic. Most people would have thrown parts at this problem until something worked. You took the time to understand what was actually happening." Maya felt a flush of pride that was entirely different from the satisfaction of solving a mechanical problem. This was recognition from someone who understood the difference between guesswork and genuine skill. 2 weeks later, Maya received an email that would change everything. She'd been selected as one of 12 American representatives to compete in the International Young Mechanics Championship in Germany. The email included travel arrangements, competition details, and a congratulations message that she read 3 times before it felt real. The competition was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Held in a massive exhibition center in Munich, it brought together 120 young mechanics from 30 countries. The event was part technical challenge, part cultural exchange, part celebration of skilled trades that often went unrecognized in a world increasingly focused on digital careers. Maya's first challenge was a diesel engine diagnostic that had her working alongside competitors from Poland, South Korea, and Brazil. Despite the language barriers, they communicated fluently in the universal language of mechanics, pointing at components, mimicking sounds, sharing tools, and celebrating each other's insights. She'd never felt so at home in her professional life. Here, nobody questioned her presence or her credentials. The only thing that mattered was her ability to solve problems, work efficiently under pressure, and think creatively when standard solutions didn't apply. The second day brought a transmission rebuild challenge that drew from every improvisation skill Maya had developed in her apartment workshop. When her initial approach hit a snag, she adapted, using techniques she'd developed when working without proper equipment. Her unconventional solution impressed the judges and earned her a place in the final round. On the last day of competition, Maya found herself among the final 8 competitors, facing a complex electrical diagnostic challenge that had stumped automotive professionals. The problem involved multiple interconnected systems in a hybrid vehicle, requiring not just mechanical knowledge, but an understanding of how different technologies interfaced with each other. Maya approached the challenge methodically, mapping out the relationships between systems before testing individual components. Her years of working on cars of different eras and styles had taught her to think systemically, to consider how changes in one area might affect seemingly unrelated functions. When she identified the root cause, a faulty sensor that was sending incorrect signals to multiple control modules, the solution was elegant in its simplicity. But finding it had required the kind of holistic thinking that came from years of working on complete vehicles rather than specializing in single systems. The announcement of winners felt surreal. Third place went to a competitor from Japan, whose technical precision had been flawless throughout the event. Second place was awarded to a young man from Germany, whose speed and efficiency had impressed everyone. And first place? Maya Rodriguez, representing the United States. The announcer called out in English and German. Maya walked to the stage in a daze, accepting the trophy from a woman who introduced herself as the head of engineering for a major automotive manufacturer. "Your approach to problem solving is exactly what our industry needs," she said as cameras flashed around them. "You don't just fix problems, you understand them." The trophy was heavier than Maya had expected, its weight grounding her in the reality of what had just happened. She'd competed against some of the most promising young mechanics in the world, and won. More than that, she'd proven to herself that her unconventional education had value, that the skills she'd developed in isolation were not just adequate, but exceptional. The flight home gave Maya time to process what the championship meant for her future. The trophy was more than an award. It was validation, proof of competence that no garage owner could dismiss. But more importantly, it represented a shift in how she saw herself and her place in the automotive world. She was no longer someone seeking entry into an established industry. She was someone with internationally recognized expertise, with skills that had been tested at the highest level. The rejection from Carlos Martinez and others like him suddenly seemed less like a judgment of her abilities and more like a failure of imagination on their part. Maya had kept in touch with several competitors from the championship, and their messages of congratulations included job offers, collaboration opportunities, and invitations to visit their countries. She'd entered the competition as an isolated self-taught mechanic and emerged as part of a global community of skilled professionals who valued competence over credentials. 2 weeks after returning home, Maya was surprised by a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find Carlos Martinez standing in the hallway, his usual confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. "I heard about the championship," he said without preamble. "Saw the news coverage online?" Maya waited, not making it easy for him. The memory of his dismissal was still fresh, the sting of his casual sexism undiminished by her recent success. "Look, I was wrong," Carlos continued, the words clearly difficult for him. "About your abilities, about women in the trade. I let my assumptions get in the way of good business sense." Maya leaned against her doorframe, studying the man who had so easily dismissed her months earlier. "Your assumptions," she repeated. Carlos flushed. "I've been running that garage for 20 years. In my experience, most of the women who applied weren't serious about the work. They were looking for something temporary, something easy. And you assumed I was the same." "I did. And I was wrong." He looked up at her directly for the first time. "I'm here to offer you a job. Lead mechanic position, full benefits, starting salary 20% above what I pay my senior guys." Maya considered the offer, feeling the satisfaction of vindication, but also something more complex. Carlos's apology was real, his recognition of her skills genuine, but it came only after external validation from the international championship. He hadn't changed his mind because he'd reassessed his initial judgment. He'd changed it because the world had told him he was wrong. "I appreciate the offer," Maya said finally, "but I've decided to start my own shop." Carlos blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Your own shop? That's a big risk, especially without established industry connections." Maya smiled, thinking of the messages in her inbox from fellow competitors, the job offers from international automotive companies, the recognition that had opened doors she'd never imagined existed. "I think I'll manage," she said. 6 months later, Maya's shop occupied a renovated warehouse space in an up-and-coming part of the city. Rodriguez Automotive specialized in complex diagnostics and hybrid vehicle repair, services that most traditional garages weren't equipped to handle. Her international competition network had connected her with suppliers, training programs, and customers who appreciated her systematic approach to problem-solving. The shop employed 4 mechanics, including 2 women Maya had met through online forums for female automotive professionals. She'd discovered a whole community of women working in the trade, many of them dealing with the same barriers and dismissals she'd faced. By creating a space that welcomed diverse perspectives and approaches, Maya found that her team solved problems more creatively and efficiently than she'd ever managed working alone. Her customer base included everyone from her original apartment building neighbors to executives with high-end European cars. Maya had kept her commitment to accessibility, offering payment plans and educational workshops alongside premium services. The combination had created a loyal customer base and a reputation for both technical excellence and community connection. On a Tuesday morning in spring, Maya was elbow-deep in the engine bay of a Tesla Model S when she heard familiar voices in the front office. She wiped her hands and walked out to find Carlos Martinez talking with her receptionist, looking around the shop with obvious interest. "Maya," he said when he saw her, extending his hand for a shake. "Impressive setup you've got here." Maya accepted the handshake, noting how different this interaction felt from their first meeting. Carlos was looking at her shop with the professional assessment of one business owner evaluating another, not the dismissive glance of someone who'd already decided she didn't belong. "What brings you by?" Maya asked. Carlos gestured toward the Tesla. "Customer of mine bought that car and needs someone who actually knows how to work on electric vehicles. My guys are good with traditional engines, but this technology is over our heads." Maya nodded. "We handle quite a few Teslas. What's the problem?" "Intermittent charging issue. Sometimes it charges normally, sometimes it won't charge at all. Tesla service is booked out for 6 weeks." Maya smiled, recognizing the systematic diagnostic challenge. "Intermittent electrical problems are tricky, but they're solvable if you approach them methodically." "That's what I figured," Carlos said. "That's why I thought of you. Your reputation for diagnostics is getting around." As Maya explained her diagnostic process, she realized that Carlos was listening with genuine respect and interest. His questions were thoughtful, his attention focused. This was the conversation she'd wanted to have in his garage bay months earlier, a professional discussion between equals about solving complex problems. "I'll take care of your customer," Maya said. "Standard diagnostic fee, and if we can't identify the problem, there's no charge for the time." Carlos nodded gratefully. "I appreciate it. And Maya, I've been thinking about what happened when you first came to my shop. I want you to know that I've learned from that mistake." Maya studied his face, seeing genuine regret there. "What have you learned?" "That talent comes in forms I wasn't looking for. That my assumptions were limiting my business and disrespecting people who deserved better." Carlos paused, then continued. "I've hired 2 women since then. Both excellent mechanics, both bringing perspectives that have made my whole team better." Maya felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction at Carlos's growth, sadness that it had taken external validation for him to recognize what should have been obvious, and hope that her championship win had opened doors for other women facing similar barriers. "That's good to hear," she said simply. As Carlos left, Maya returned to the Tesla, running her hands along the charging port and listening to the subtle sounds the system made during operation. The problem would be solvable, just like all the others she'd encountered over the years. Each challenge was a puzzle waiting for the right combination of knowledge, intuition, and systematic thinking. But this diagnosis felt different somehow, not just because it was complex or lucrative, but because it represented the kind of professional recognition she'd been seeking when she first walked into Carlos's garage. The difference was that now she didn't need his validation or anyone else's. She'd built her own space, created her own opportunities, and proven her worth on her own terms. Maya plugged in her diagnostic equipment and began the methodical process of understanding what the car was trying to tell her. Outside, she could hear the sounds of her team working, the pneumatic hiss of lifts, the rhythmic ratcheting of socket wrenches, the occasional laugh or consultation between colleagues. This was the sound of her dream realized, but not in the way she'd originally imagined. She'd thought success meant gaining acceptance into an existing world that had initially rejected her. Instead, she'd discovered that success meant creating a new world where her skills, approach, and values could flourish without compromise. The Tesla's charging system yielded its secrets gradually, through careful testing and logical deduction. When Maya finally identified the faulty component, a sensor that was intermittently failing to communicate with the charging control module, she felt the familiar satisfaction of a puzzle solved. But beneath that satisfaction was something deeper, the knowledge that she'd built not just a successful business, but a life that honored both her technical abilities and her commitment to making automotive repair more accessible and inclusive. As the sun set over the warehouse, casting long shadows across the garage floor, Maya looked around at the space she'd created. The trophy from the International Young Mechanics Championship sat on a shelf in her office, but it was just one symbol among many. Customer thank you notes, photos from training workshops she'd conducted, business cards from the growing network of female mechanics she'd connected with around the world. The rejection from Carlos Martinez had stung because it had seemed to negate everything she'd worked for. But in retrospect, it had been exactly what she needed. Not validation of her existing path, but a push toward creating something entirely new. She'd transformed rejection into motivation, isolated learning into community building, and personal success into opportunities for others. Maya turned off the shop lights and locked the door, her keys heavy with the weight of ownership and responsibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new opportunities to prove that excellence could emerge from unexpected places. But tonight, she was content to walk to her car, a newer model she'd been able to afford, but which she'd still modified and improved herself, knowing that she'd not only found her place in the automotive world, but had helped create space for others to find theirs as well. The street was quiet as she drove home, past the building where she'd lived during those early years of apartment-based learning, past Carlos Martinez's garage where her professional journey had taken its most important detour. The city looked the same, but Maya's relationship to it had been completely transformed. She was no longer someone seeking acceptance from a world that didn't understand her value. She was someone who had created her own version of that world, one where skill mattered more than credentials, where innovation was valued over tradition, and where the next generation of mechanics would find doors open that had been closed to her. In her rearview mirror, the lights of Rodriguez Automotive disappeared into the distance, but their symbolism remained with her. Proof that sometimes the best response to rejection isn't to keep knocking on closed doors, but to build new ones that open for everyone.